Thank you so much for joining us for Indianapolis this week, and finally in sight for what has been an unprecedented election season. In just 2 days now, the votes will be cast and we should know who's won. Let's start with that incredibly close race for U.S. Senate. The race listed as a toss-up now by virtually every national estimate. You've also seen that Monmouth University poll this week that had the race a dead heat for Evan Bayah and Todd Young, now tied at 45%. And let's welcome in Democrat Evan Bayah joining us on the campaign trail right now over FaceTime. Senator Bayah, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, Jason.
You have been virtually under fire since re-entering this race several months ago now, especially over your time spent living in Indiana since leaving office 6 years ago. Now this week, Politico is reporting that you are paying back some taxpayer funds used for hotel expenditures back in 2009. Your reaction to that report out just days before the election?
You know, Jason, I've been a Hoosier since the day I was born, and I will be until the day I die. We live in Indianapolis. We love our home, and there was a clerical error made, and we'll correct that. Same thing happened to Dick Lugar, by the way, and he's a fine man.
It's good to see you and your wife Susan there together. You've got a new ad out together in which she essentially says that your opponents are mischaracterizing you right now and attacking you falsely. How important is that argument to you winning on Tuesday?
Jason, I think what matters is the future of the viewers, the people who are watching us right now. I want to help make college more affordable by building on our 21st Century Scholars Program. I want to fight for trade deals that are fair to Indiana businesses and workers, folks like the people at Carrier, so that their jobs don't get shipped to Mexico. We want to make sure that Social Security and Medicare are there for our senior citizens. I think those things are the things that matter, not all these negative attacks. I think most folks have had enough of that. I know I have.
Have you been surprised since re-entering the race about how negative this campaign season has come on both sides?
Yeah, and I think it's most unfortunate. I think that the race should be about your viewers, their future, what we can do positively to build Indiana and America. That's why I'm running. I think it's unfortunate that my opponent and his allies really seem intent on just tearing down. I think we need politicians who will build us up.
What are your polls showing you right now about just how close this race is with just a couple days to go?
Our polls have us ahead. They had us ahead last night and the night before. I think it'll be close, but, you know, a lot like I think your viewers are probably tired of the negative ads. I think that they really don't pay too much attention to polls. So I hope that they'll get out and vote for something positive.
We want to thank Senator Bayah and wife Susan there. A bad connection. We want to bring in RTV6's Rafael Sanchez now as well.
Joining us now is Jay Kenworthy, Communications Director for the Todd Young campaign. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
RNC Chairman Reince Priebus on Friday said that he expects a Republican majority in the Senate. Will Mr. Young be part of that majority?
We think so. Everything is trending our direction. We've had a lot of success these last couple weeks getting Todd out on the road, talking to voters. He's crisscrossed the state several times. And Hoosiers are really responding to his message of a good education that leads to a great job right here in the state of Indiana.
This has been a fierce competition. You began as the underdog, and now some polls say that you're tied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, Hoosiers have really been interested in what Todd has to say. His record as a Marine, his background as somebody who works across the aisle in Congress to get things done. That's what people are looking for these days. They want solutions in Washington, not more of the same.
So on this Sunday, as we look forward to the ending of early voting at noon tomorrow and then Election Day on Tuesday, what is your closing statement to the Hoosier voting public?
Well, this is really an election about trust. Who can you trust more to go to Washington and serve the interests of Hoosiers in Congress? On the one hand, we have Todd Young, who's a Marine, who has a record of working across the aisle. On the other hand, you have Evan Bayah, who has spent the last 6 years as a lobbyist, enriching himself. So we're going to be focused on solutions going forward, and we're excited about what's to come on Tuesday.
And do you think we'll have results by Tuesday night, or do you think this is going to be a long issue? We're going to be like with the Gore-Bush campaign, where we had to wait till December to figure out a president and all the other offices.
Hey, I think you and I and all the voters out there watching the ads every time they turn on the television are hoping that it ends on Tuesday night.
Tuesday, but your campaign, though, is ready to, whatever comes to this campaign, to hopefully have an announcement by Wednesday and live by whatever the outcome of the voters is.
Absolutely. We trust the voters. We trust the election officials who are running these elections, and we think we're going to have have a good result on Tuesday night.
Jay Kenworthy with the Todd Young campaign. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Best of luck to you. I know you have more doors to knock on between now and Tuesday. Thank you. Jason, now back to you.
Our thanks to you both. Let's turn now to the race for governor to replace Mike Pence there at the State House. Democrat John Gregg and Republican Eric Holcomb making feverish final pitches across the state during this final week. Polls have consistently shown Gregg slightly ahead, but Republicans believe they can beat that prediction come Tuesday. Our TV6 State House reporter Katie Hines is covering that race for us.
Both of the major party candidates are hitting the road in the last week of the campaign to take their message directly to voters. Lieutenant Governor Eric Holcomb and former Indiana House Speaker John Gregg are making their final pitches ahead of Tuesday. The latest Monmouth University poll released 1 week ahead of the election puts Gregg ahead of Holcomb by 6 points.
We've got some internal polling that shows a different story, and I think we're in the passing lane, and I feel good about where we are. And as I get around the state of Indiana, I'm seeing Hoosiers every day that leads me to believe that November 8th is going to be a good night for Republicans.
We're hearing a lot from Hoosiers. We're seeing a lot of Republicans and independents show up, which is what we need. So we're just working like every hand we shake, every voter we talk to makes a difference.
Both candidates continue to see major outside money flowing into their campaigns, including $2.5 million in contributions to Holcomb from the Republican Governors Association and $600,000 from the Democratic Governors Association to Gregg, all in about 1 week's time. Recent quarterly campaign filings show Gregg has raised more than $15 million this year to date, while Holcomb has raised more than $11 million. I asked both candidates what they will do on day one if elected.
The first thing we're going to do, as we've said from day one, is sign an executive order that would give civil rights protection to members of the LGBT community that work for the state. I think that's very important. We want to lead by example.
We're going to focus on people. We're going to make sure that our workforce is aligned with the needs of the 21st century. We're going to make sure that we're focused on truly a long-term, sustainable infrastructure program.
It's a race that was reset about 100 days ago. We'll have a better sense of who will take the lead in a little more than 48 hours. Jason, back to you.
Katie, thank you. And of course, that stunning news this week. Libertarian governor candidate Rex Bell taken to the hospital after suffering what his campaign is calling a mild stroke. We're told he's expected to make a complete recovery. Our best wishes today to Rex and his family. Now to the 9th district race in southern Indiana, ramping up with new allegations this week. Democrat Shelley Yoder hammering away at Republican Trey Hollingsworth over an AP report. It claims Hollingsworth previously filed residency paperwork in 6 states requiring he live there, not in Indiana, to represent various businesses. The report also quotes an IU law professor that certain filings, including one in North Carolina, could have been crimes, though minor ones.
This is actually a story that has revealed that my opponent is registered in 5, and now 1 other state has come forth, Missouri. So now 6 other states that he is now registered as a resident of those states, and Indiana isn't even one of them. He has really pretty much what they have said in that AP report, that this is a crime.
She wants to talk about a clerical error that my team made, a team member that's no longer with us, in 6 states. Now, that's 6 of the 27 states that I do business in. It's 5 companies out of the 70 companies. I fundamentally believe that this election is about where we are going as a country. And Shelley Yoder represents that status quo, tax and spend, ultra-liberal approach that Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi want. They want her as their foot soldier.
Charges were ever filed. Hollingsworth's campaign says that all the paperwork has since been corrected. Now, an indication of just how much Indiana matters to Washington on Tuesday, high-profile visits this week on the Republican side of the aisle to help in the 9th district run and Todd Young's U.S. Senate bid. I sat down exclusively with the GOP Majority Whip, Congressman Steve Scalise, to ask if those visits indicate just how close those races are as we near the finish line amidst new reports of potential unrest in Republican leadership.
You know, we knew from the beginning that this was going to be a battleground district, and it's turned out to be the case.
In town this week, supporting fellow Republican Trey Hollingsworth, the Republican Majority Whip in the House, Steve Scalise, came to Indy just days after Speaker Paul Ryan came to the Hoosier State, also to campaign for Hollingsworth and Republican Senate candidate Todd Young.
He's there for all the right reasons. He is a servant leader. You will be so proud of Todd Young as your United States Senator.
Yeah, you've got so much happening in Indiana, and of course, with Todd Young, this race could determine the direction of the Senate and who's controlling the Senate next year. And obviously, I serve with Todd, and just a great guy, and somebody I think will be a great leader for the state of Indiana. And I've seen him up close and how hard he works. But then when you see that his seat's vacant now, I think it's important that we replace him with a conservative that's going to share that same hard work philosophy of helping to create jobs and get our country back on track. And that's really what excites me about Trey Hollingsworth, is that he's somebody who's got a background in creating jobs. And his opponent, you've got a real clear contrast in Shelley Yoder, who wants to raise taxes, who wants Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker again and keep the radical agenda of Barack Obama for another 4 years. I don't think that's what the people of Indiana want.
We need a president that will do that.
Our exclusive conversation came after Governor Mike Pence Thursday initially failed to endorse a return to the Speaker role for Paul Ryan in an interview with the National Review, but later told CNN he does. A Pence spokesperson afterwards said there's nothing to it, though with both Pence and Ryan potentially seeking the GOP nomination 4 years from now should Trump lose on Tuesday. Some reports point to early political maneuvering. Scalise, though, told RTV6 the focus is on now, and most Republicans are all on the same page.
Should Speaker Ryan continue to be Speaker moving forward?
Well, Paul's done a great job as Speaker, and it's a tough climate. I mean, when you're the Speaker of the House in the House majority, when you've got Barack Obama in the White House, obviously we've got somebody who doesn't agree with our philosophy. I mean, a radical leftist versus a conservative House. That's why we're working so hard to make sure that we can actually get a conservative in the White House and Donald Trump with Mike Pence as his vice president, which will be such a refreshing change, where then the House can be working in that first 100 days with the president to get our country back on track, to roll back radical regulations that are killing jobs, to put a replacement instead of Obamacare, to have actual reforms where you can lower costs. And so having Trey in that fight with us is going to help us be able to do it. And it would be a really exciting first 100 days where we're all pulling on the same page to get our country back on track and to strengthen our national security. And it can happen, but obviously this election is going to determine a lot about which direction we go.
And so welcome back to Indianapolis this week. We are joined by some real all-stars here right now. Mary Beth Schneider, of course, Laura Beck for the Democrats, and Marcus Barlow for the Republicans. And Theo Epstein will be the next president of the United States, right, Mary Beth?
I think so. I think he deserves this.
Yeah.
He's earned it.
Little Cubs talk right out of the way. Okay, on to the real business at hand. Let's talk about this U.S. Senate race. Totally, over the last few days. Now we're good. Our focus is on Tuesday, Election Day, of course, just around the corner. New polls out this week. The average of all current polls at RealClearPolitics.com on Friday now gives Todd Young a 1-point lead within that margin of error against Senator Evan Bayah. Mary Beth, what has happened in this race over the past couple of months?
Just a constant drip, 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 drip of bad news for Evan Bayah. I think that he made career choices based on I'm never running for political office again. He didn't do anything wrong, but things that don't look good if you were in the Senate and I want to come back to the Senate to a big chunk of the voting public. Plus, I think that they perhaps had banked on the Bayah name having more cachet than it might after he's been out of the state for quite a while.
Laura, I'll give you last word on this, but Marcus is salivating over there to talk about this race, and I was very excited. Marcus, take it away.
Well, I think it's a little bit more than that. I think part of why some of those stories have had the impact that they've had is that Bayah has either denied or just outright given false information and then had to come back later and correct information that him or his campaign gave before. And I think that kind of cuts to the Evan Bayah brand because, we all know in all these elections, trust is a big thing. And then when Evan Bayah first comes out and they say, well, these meetings were for this, and then an AP report comes out and contradicts that, and then they're like, well, we misspoke. I think that kind of stuff really hits you. And some of the reports that have come out lately have been more on the side of did something wrong, whether it was holding campaign fundraisers in your official office or it's accepting gifts. Some of those things, they're really starting to pile up on Bayah, and that's why I think we've seen his complete plummet in the polls.
All right, Laura, final word on the Senate race.
Well, I think what's fascinating about the Senate race, it is a microcosm of the fight for the Senate. And so there has been so much outside money that has come in. And from the very start, Todd Young was down in the polls until the outside money forces started coming in and really funding that campaign. I think there was a recent statistic that just came out that said, I think it was 40% of his individual donors were from Indiana. So that means a majority of his individual donors are not from Indiana. And you're also seeing, I think because the race has tightened up, the media paying about the same amount of attention to Todd Young in terms of his tax issues and his background and his funders. So I think this is about far more than Todd Young and far more than about Evan Bayah. And I think what we're going to see is it's about that fight for the Senate. So if it's this close, we'll just have to watch and see what happens.
See how it plays out on Tuesday. And I asked Senator Bayah about this briefly before we had those connectivity issues earlier in the show. Do you think he anticipated what would happen in this race when he got back into it?
I don't know if anyone ever anticipates what happens when you get into a race. I mean, I really don't. I don't think when you politics is one of those businesses that it can change in an instant. And so I don't know if this is something that they could have expected, but with the national climate so toxic and so vitriolic, I think that has really had a lot to do to contribute to that.
Let's talk about the governor's race now. Of course, Eric Holcomb and John Gregg, especially with just a few days left to go. Where does this race go from here? Are voters, do they have their minds made up at this point? Is this a done deal?
On that race, I suspect that not everyone has their mind made up because there are a lot of people perhaps who have focused more on the presidential race or they've seen the barrage of commercials on Bayah Young. And you may have those people who routinely come in and vote Republican, vote for Holcomb, and so maybe he'll pull it out. But on the other hand, I think John Gregg has run an amazingly good campaign and Holcomb not a very good campaign. And there still, I think, is a sense of perhaps you need a change in the governor's office that will help John Gregg at the end, too.
Laura, I'll give you first word on this.
Oh, I'm going to let Marcus go
okay. How courteous.
I defer my time to you.
Right. No, I think that, we've seen this race tighten in the latest public polls that have come out. Previous polls had John Gregg up, which I think you would expect. Eric Holcomb had a shorter campaign season. John Gregg has been running for governor forever, so he had a lead. Well, that's forever in politics. He had a lead, and I think we're seeing the race tighten because I think we're seeing, just to agree with Mary Beth, like we're seeing some of those Republicans come home to vote for Eric Holcomb. Maybe he will pull it out because of then, but I think this race, much more than I think the Senate race or how Indiana's going to go presidential, is really going to depend on who's going to show up on Election Day. And some of those get out the voter efforts that now we're seeing the parties start to really hammer on. We're just going to see like who shows up on that Election Day and who who pulls the lever for who.
Well, Democrats are really motivated to take the governor's office back. I mean, we've been in the wilderness now since 2004, and I know there's a lot of appetite to take it back, and you can really see that on the bus tour that they've been running. John has run a really issue-based campaign, and I think if you're looking at the two candidates, one of the key parts, even when you're watching the debates, is that he's so well versed on policy, and Eric really has not offered up some of the policy alternatives. But at the same time, the polling and who comes out to vote is really going to be an interesting part of it, because John Gregg and Donald Trump have a similar economic message, which is you're working harder and you're not getting ahead, while you've got Eric Holcomb saying everything's great, it's just the land of wine and roses right now. So that message dissonance, it'll be interesting to see if that picks up with it as well. But even Kellyanne Conway, which I thought was fascinating, who polled in Indiana for Mike Pence when he was governor, was on a program the other night on cable news saying that Donald Trump, in their internals, is running ahead of Republican gubernatorial candidates. And she listed off all these states, and she listed off Indiana. So that's going to be, that's an outlier that I'm not sure how it'll work out.
Well, I think our last gubernatorial election, it was the same way. I think Mitt Romney outran.
Yeah, it was like a 2.5 to 3 point race.
Quickly, with a minute left, we'll all be watching the presidential race, of course, on Tuesday. The race that you are most interested in watching, and you, at this point, have no clue what's going to happen.
The 9th District, I think. I think that there is a lot of antipathy towards Trey Hollingsworth, but that district is drawn for Republican. It's predominantly Republican. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes out.
I think the one I'm watching actually is a Senate race here in Indianapolis. It's Sarah Wiley, who's a teacher in Franklin Township, is running against a city councilor, Aaron Freeman, and she's been running a really great campaign, and it's taken a little bit of a negative turn. She's getting hit hard in the mailbox, but I think she's got a good shot at it, so I'm watching that one.
Yeah.
They sure do.
The one I'm looking the most forward to is the U.S. Senate race. I think that should Evan Bayah lose, I think that's going to be a huge national story. The one I don't have a clue what's going to happen is probably the governor's race. I think that's really going to be interesting on election night to see where some of these counties come in and how that race ends up.
Indiana at the center of it all, and we would not have it any other way. Marcus Barlow, Laura Beck, Mary Beth Schneider with the hat on cue. Thank you for joining us.